Good afternoon. This is Greg Core from OSEP's Monitoring and State Improvement Planning Division, and welcome to our November monthly TA call. We're excited to feature information on OSEP-funded model demonstration projects to improve academic outcomes of students with intellectual disabilities in elementary and middle schools. Specifically, the following projects will present this afternoon. Shared Writing Instructional Model for Students with Intellectual Disabilities will be presented by Russell Swinburne-Romine from the University of Kansas Center for Research. Project Impact, Inclusion Made Practical for All Children and Teachers, will be presented by Shawnee Wakeman of the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. And then third will be a design thinking approach to enhance educators' use of data-based individualization to improve literacy skills of students with intellectual disability. That will be presented by Christopher Lemons of Stanford University. So we will be starting off with Shawnee Wakeman. As I mentioned, she is from UNC Charlotte, and she'll be speaking about Project Impact. The purpose of Project Impact is to support teachers through coaching experiences to design grade-aligned reading comprehension instruction, use research-based practices, and generalized practices for use in inclusive settings. Impact intends to achieve 4 goals. First, improve outcomes in the comprehension skills of students with intellectual disability. 2, support teachers to align instruction to grade level content standards and promote access to the general curriculum. 3, develop strategies and tools to support implementation of the comprehension model in inclusive classrooms. And then 4th, provide intensive coaching to support implementation of model in both special education and general education settings. So Shawnee, please let us know more about your project.
Thank you, and good afternoon. So Project Impact is a project related to working on reading comprehension with students with moderate and severe intellectual disability. If you'd like to go to the next slide. Our project, it began on January 1st of 2019, and it is a 3-year project. And our partner is the Charlotte-Mecklenburg School District, which is the largest district in North Carolina. Next slide. As Greg said, we have 4 goals. We're working specifically on comprehension with students with intellectual disability, but we're also working with our teachers to support their instruction and aligning their instruction with the grade level content standard. As we move into the different phases of the project, they are generating their own lessons and implementing those lessons in inclusive classrooms. Part of our project is really looking at intensive coaching to support those teachers to be able to implement those grade aligned lessons. Next slide. So in year 1 of the project, we had 3 elementary schools and 2 middle schools. And so we had 7 special ed teachers, 5 paraprofessionals, and 5 general education teachers who were participants in the project. We included our paraprofessionals because it's very important that they're implementing instruction as well, and they can be using the evidence-based practices, which are which is the focus of this call, with students with intellectual disabilities. So we want to train them to fidelity to implement those evidence-based practices as part of the project, since they are an integral part of the instruction. We have a 2-year project, and so that we have a PLC 1, and this was the PLC 1 for year 1. And in year 2, we've had to make some changes because of COVID, but we also had some different configurations so that we got people together as our schools, as these teachers are in separate schools throughout the county, and it's a very large county. Getting from one side to the other can take an hour. We wanted to get folks a chance to integrate and meet people within their area as well as within their grade level band. So the elementary teachers were trained together, and then the next time we had elementary and middle teachers who were in the same location talk with each other, because again, many of their students were going to feed into those other middle school classrooms. So it's good to have those kind of relationships. So we pay our teachers for their time for all of the trainings, but we also included those teachers regularly in feedback loops. So they gave us feedback about what worked with the training, what didn't work with the training, what worked in their classroom, what was practical, what wasn't practical, where they needed more support. And so after each one of the phases, we conducted focus groups and did interviews with those teachers as well to gather their feedback about the project and the model as we were developing it related to the evidence-based practices in those lessons. If you go to the next slide. So the model starts with, we have students, and these students are being served in separate classrooms for the most part. And our goal is to help students move and get more inclusive opportunities in the gen ed classroom as part of the project. So the model builds upon delivering evidence-based practices with fidelity in the special ed classroom so that our students get the content, our teachers and paras get the training that they need to do that. So that's phase one. So you'll see on the slide where it says 1 and 2 and 3, those are the 3 phases within the project. So we use systematic instruction, a system of least prompts, and constant time delay. We implemented those with fidelity with our teachers. We did the training, and then we did regular coaching sessions with them to make sure they were maintaining that level of fidelity that they need to be able to implement those practices correctly. We did this in the context of 2 published curriculum. And so that they were able to use those curriculum and have those materials to be able to develop their skills. And then we moved them in phase 2 to develop grade-aligned lesson plans with their gen ed partners. So the gen ed teachers and the special ed teachers would come together and do unit plans. We looked to fill gaps within the scripted curriculums or the published curriculums for maybe content areas that were not addressed as well, and that were part of the gen ed curriculum, so that our students were getting more experiences with more lessons to supplement the published curriculum that way. And our teachers, were able to develop some of their skills and their strategies, as well as our gen ed teachers came in and modeled some of those lessons for our teachers, so that our gen ed teachers then got to know the students in the separate classroom, so that we were building relationships, so that when they moved to the inclusive classroom, they were going to have, they were going to see that familiar face and have those interactions. We taught them about using database decisions within those lessons, getting that progress monitoring data. And then phase 3 is a peer supports programs, which is another evidence-based practice for this population. And so as part of the end of phase 2, we trained our peers to be able to do peer supports whenever the students, again, familiar faces when they went to the inclusion classroom, as well as our students saw those familiar faces, but those students, those peers, then were able to engage with our students. They get to know them, they know their skills, they know how to communicate, and they could immediately hit the ground running for those inclusion lessons when they started. If you, at the end of these, if you have the PowerPoint, you'll be able to see there's several videos that are included and embedded within this PowerPoint, and you can click on the pictures or so forth to watch the video clips of the practices of the inclusive lessons that are included in the PowerPoint. If you'd like to go to the next slide. So again, this is a video as well, if you're able to click on this through the PowerPoint. This is one of our inclusion lessons, and I'll just point out a few things for you within the picture itself. So we have the special ed teacher is sitting on the floor beside one of her students. The rest of the students are all integrated among the gen ed students, as you can see. The young man that has, he's got a black hoodie on with an orange in the middle of the picture is one of the peers. And in this lesson in particular, he was a natural. This classroom, these peers were, before we started the peer supports training, they were starting to pick up all these skills and were implementing things on their own. And so we knew right away that we needed to support them because they wanted to engage with their students with disabilities right away. And so he is sitting next to a young man who did some preemptive work. So the gen ed teacher and the special teacher planned together. They were working on developing an alternate ending to Peter Pan, which was the gen ed, this group of students were reading gen ed Peter Pan in the gen ed classroom. So our students were reading gen ed Peter Pan in the separate and the gen ed classroom, but they were working on an alternate ending. And so our students were able to generate and think about their responses to an alternate ending in the separate classroom, and then bring those ideas into the gen ed classroom to be able to engage more effectively. And so they're working together. That young man with the hoodie and his partner are talking about those alternate endings and that response. and he is encouraging him to raise his hand, to make his response, to say the response. And so he is really supporting him in how he can engage effectively with his content in that classroom. If you'd like to go to the next slide. So the model, again, when we look at that, we have scaffolds for the teachers all along the way, and the coaching happened almost weekly, that we would go in and provide them feedback. Once they kept fidelity and we were able to maintain the fidelity, then the coaching became other aspects of it. It became about lesson planning. It became about the content. It became about engagement strategies for the gen ed teachers as well. And so that input that they gave throughout about what they needed help with, we were able to refine the model for year 2. We also gave pre and post comprehension test measures for all of the students who were included in each one of the phases. And then that also gives us the opportunity to look at longitudinally if there are changes for students in their IEPs and they're related to their service and the content of those IEPs over time as they participate in the project, as we're trying to raise the bar with the expectations and giving our teachers the support they need to be able to implement evidence-based practice, and our students have better outcomes for that. We also have the opportunity for the teachers in year 1 to become trainers for year 2 and work with their peers, because we want to be sustainable. We want this to be the district to be able to continue to be able to implement the model after the project the funding is over. So for sustainability purposes, we currently in year 2, even with COVID, we were able to give access. The district gave us access to one school. One school actually contacted the district and said, you know, when are we getting the model to come back? When are they coming to support our teachers again? And so we had an existing teacher in this school already, and then they were bringing in new teachers. So it's a perfect school really for year 2, because we were able to train one of the teachers to become the coach, as well as one of the paras who participated last year. And now we have a new set of paras and another teacher that are going to be new to the project. So we're going to be implementing the coaching to see how the coaching works for sustainability purposes within that same school. If you'd like to go to the next slide. So the original plan was up to 15 weeks in phase 1, where we were working on fidelity and those evidence-based practices in the separate classroom. Then we had 8 to 10 weeks in phase 2, depending upon how quickly folks implemented and were able to maintain those practices. We continued phase 2 coaching continues in that process, but we're working on those inclusion lessons, or at least that inclusive content, and building upon that, because then in phase 3, we were working with the peers and the peer supports in the gen ed classrooms. So we had gen ed classrooms happening in phase 2 and 3, and then the peer supports came in as part of phase 3. And then the summer would be obviously the revisions, the feedback that we were given and so forth, and looking at our data. So if you go to the next slide, you'll start to see some of the data that we have. So at the end of year 1, at the end of phase 1, we had 22 elementary students and 16 middle school students who we got pre and post test data from at the beginning and end of phase 1. And we came up with a medium effect size for both groups, that there was a significant change from where they were at their pre-test to post-test as part of being in the project. If you go to the next slide, you'll see that at the end of phase 2, at the end of this data, that we had, this is where the students started going into the inclusion classrooms, and that our teachers started co-planning together and implementing some of those evidence-based practices in those inclusive classrooms, as well as supplementing the instruction they were getting in the separate classroom. So we had, out of the 33 students that we had the 17 students were included in the lessons and 16 were not. So we had 33 students to get a post-test after phase 2. And the difference between, regardless of whether it was elementary students or middle school students, if the student went into the inclusive classroom, they had a significantly different post-test score than the students who did not go into the inclusive classroom. And so what that told us was that there was a large effect size. By going into the inclusive classroom, those students were gaining more skills. They were having more knowledge and being able to follow along with the text and be able to implement things, the strategies independently, to go back to find answers in the text when they didn't know the answers. And so here's some of the changes that we're making. I know I'm going long on my time and I don't need to. So in year 2, we had to make some significant changes, obviously because of COVID. All of our trainings are online modules now in response to the school district. They wanted all of them to be online, that our students could access, our teachers could access asynchronously whenever they had time. So we have 2-week blocks of time for our teachers to go into the training to complete the training. We created, all of our books are now adapted and online for tools for them, as well as the system of least prompts. And I'm going to show you some of those tools in a slide in just a minute. All of our observations will occur in GoReact, where we can do coaching with them. We could do live coaching, or we can do recorded coaching with them and do timestamps and have that conversation. The beauty of GoReact is they're going to see themselves teach, and they don't ever get a lot of opportunity to see themselves teach and reflect on that. And this is a good thing that happened because of COVID. We are going to have one of our teachers is in the classroom with our students face-to-face, and the other teacher is online. So it gives us lots of opportunities to see what works. Can our teachers deliver these evidence-based practices with fidelity in an online format, in the face-to-face format when they have to be socially distanced and so forth. So it really does give us opportunities to really test out our model to see what works and what doesn't in both types of settings. And then we're going to consider doing Zoom inclusion for our students. This is one of the things that we're brainstorming about, is for our students in the separate classroom. If they cannot be included, if the school district doesn't get to the point where they want kids to shift around in classrooms, we're going to, because we've been doing Zoom for so long, or that kind of format, an online format, we're going to have our kids in the separate classroom Zoom into the classroom within the inclusion classroom, so that they can participate in that format as well. And we're going to try it out. Even though they'll be in the school, the benefit is that they'll have their teachers right there with them to support them as they do that. So if you'd like to go to the next slide. So this is what the modules look like now, and if you want to, and Blythe, if you'd like to go to the next one, these are Articulate Rise, is where we built our module, so that you can see kind of what they look like and what it looks like for the teachers as they go through the training at their own pace. If you'd like to go to the next slide. The nice thing about Articulate Rise as well is once we build it, the school district can have it. It's free, it's never going to go away. As long as they have the link, they can access the materials, which is really nice, and then it can be sustainable. This is our website that we've built. We're putting everything that we build up here for the teachers to engage with, but then it can be national at that point, and anyone can access these. Our adapted books are here already, and we're including all of the resources. You can see the cards and the tools that we've developed that we're putting here for the evidence-based practices. If you go to the next slide. This is the virtual tool that we've built. So we built an online tool that will read the tool. And again, this is one of the things, if you have the link, you can get to the video and watch it on your own. This is about a 4-minute video, but this is really impressive to the point that we've taken the curriculum. It's an online reader, and it can be done at home by the parents or with the teacher online, that they can do it as independent practice, or they can do it with their teachers. It goes through the system of least prompts. If you see the hand is giving it goes through the prompt levels. It also reinforces them when they select the right response. It gives response options. There are 2 versions, if they need response options or if they don't. And so it has the repeated storyline that they can repeat and read together. And so it has all of the pieces that we want to have in the tool. If they were in the classroom, it's a virtual tool that they can access. And again, we're really excited to try this out and see how well it works for our students. And if you want to go to the next slide, this is our last thing that we've been building, and this one is just in the process. We're going to clean it up a little bit, but we've been demoing resources for our teachers as well so if this is what you're doing, and for our teacher that we're working with now who's totally online with her students, here are some of the online resources you can use to engage in those active student responding. We can do the old school, and we can show the whiteboards and the response cards, but we can also do things like Pear Deck and Boom cards that aren't necessarily that expensive, as well as editable online worksheets. So we're trying to give her some resources to think about. So here's what we're doing, and then she's going to be able to give us feedback about what works, what doesn't work, and we can refine our model along the way. And so that's what we're doing in Project Impact, and we'll save our questions to the end. So thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing that, Shawnee. That's a fascinating project, and particularly impressed to see how well you all pivoted during COVID and came up with some really interesting strategies. Our next presenter is Chris Lemons. Chris is from Stanford University. His project is data-based individualization by design. This addresses the OSER's recent call to establish a model demonstration project to improve academic outcomes for students with intellectual disabilities in elementary and middle schools. The project addresses current challenges by designing and delivering ongoing professional development and coaching to increase general and special education teachers' knowledge and skill related to data-based individualization and disseminating high-quality products excuse me, that provide guidance for replicating the DBI by design model. So Chris, we'd love to hear what you have to say today.
Okay, sounds good. I think I should have maybe named the project a shorter name. It's kind of long. So yeah, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So thanks everybody for joining today. I look forward to the questions. So basically, here's the team we put together. The researchers, Jill Lohr, Stephanie Alateva, Diane Browder, a lot of experts in the field of literacy for students with intellectual disability. And then on the right side, the team that actually gets all the work done, Jody, Linda, and Lakshmi, who are the coaches for the project. So you can go to the next slide. So one of the things we did intentionally on this project is we really wanted to go to schools that were rural, suburban, and urban schools. And so you can see some of those, the current district partners we have. So we're here in San Francisco, Fremont in California, and then the other schools are in Nashville and one school in Alabama. So we're really trying to explore how instruction might work for kids with intellectual disability in a variety of different school settings. Go to the next slide. And so overall, our goal is to improve literacy outcomes of students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And like the other projects, we're in both elementary and middle schools. And so our goal is to design and deliver ongoing professional development and coaching that is going to help both general and special education teachers improve their knowledge and skill related to data-based individualization, which is a process that teachers use data to consistently kind of monitor students' progress in the area of literacy and make adaptations if a student is not responding as much as we would like. And then in the end of the project, just like all the model demos, we are have a goal to disseminate some really high quality products that can provide guidance for replicating our model once the project is done. You can go to the next slide. So this is kind of an overall idea of what we're doing. So if you look on the left-hand side of your screen, the rectangles, these are really the practices that we're focused on in our professional development. So we're training teachers how to do data-based individualization. And I'll have a slide in a second that gives you a little more information about that if you're not familiar with it. We're also training them in Diane Browder's literacy model for students with intellectual disability. There'll be a slide on that. And then also just evidence-based supporting instructional practices. So using explicit instruction, monitoring behavior, and kind of improving just general instruction. The circles around the square, you can see that at the top we're using kind of like Shawnee's project, a supported professional learning community. I think we really saw last year the teachers, they have great ideas and they share their ideas with one another, and connecting them, across campuses and districts, I think has been really positive. We're using a design thinking approach, and this is the idea that it's probably the thing I've enjoyed the most about this project is I think a lot of times when you do a research project, it's very rigid, and as the researcher, you go in and say you have to do it this way, and you have to hit fidelity, and that's just how it is. In this project, we throw things at the teachers and say, okay, what worked, what didn't work, what do we need to change? And I think we're learning a ton from the participating teachers of really how do we get research-based practices and make them feasible in schools. And then we're using an evidence-based coaching model where we're providing teachers with ongoing, very specific coaching related to their practices. On the right-hand side of the screen, these are the things that we're hoping to achieve at the end of the project. So enhancing teachers' knowledge and skill related to all the little rectangles on the left-hand side of the screen, improving their students' outcomes in the area of literacy, also enhancing alignment of instruction with grade level standards. So we're working very closely with the general ed teachers to make sure that we're really pushing our students and teachers as hard as we can to get them to align instruction with grade level standards, and then improving both the quality and quantity of inclusion so our students have access to the general ed curriculum. And then the last thing that we're doing is working with teachers to make sure that the IEPs are aligned with the recent Andrew F. Supreme Court case. So for those of you who may not be familiar with it, basically it was a Supreme Court case, I think 2 years ago, that really raised the bar of what is expected of an IEP. And it really indicates that in the IEP, there needs to be a clear data-driven model for evaluating progress and making adaptations and changes if a student is not responding positively to intervention. And so we're working with teachers to build that into the IEP. And you can go to the next slide. So our activities, a lot of it's very similar to Shawnee's model. You know, we're providing ongoing professional development and coaching. We're having our teachers go through modules. We used Moodle last year. A lot of our teachers didn't love Moodle, so we switched to Torch this year, which is a different platform that is just a little easier for them to use, I think. You can see we're doing that iterative development and refinement. We're following a design thinking model where we get a lot of input from the teachers. And then we're working for the teachers to integrate the DVI process both in general and special education. And then the idea is over each of the years, we're going to replicate what we've done before and then end up with being able to disseminate a model that teachers can integrate into their instruction. And you can go to the next slide. So this is just an overall idea of where we were going. So we very intentionally started very small. So within each district, we just had one elementary pair of teachers and one middle school pair of teachers. And then our goal was for the teachers to return every year and increase the number of students they're working with, and then to increase the number of teachers in the district. And like Shawnee's project as well, COVID kind of threw a huge wrench into all this. But we are on track right now. We're supporting teachers who are delivering instruction virtually. And it's actually been really nice that because our professional development was already designed to be virtual, that we were able to pivot very quickly to supporting teachers. And then we also had a great opportunity. Several parents contacted us who were not very satisfied with the literacy supports their child was getting. And so we're actually running a study right now where we have parents delivering reading intervention at home. So we've kind of expanded a little bit there. And our goal is to continue with the teachers we have this year. And then I think the project will likely be extended one additional year because of COVID. And you can go to the next slide. So this is the DVI process. So if you're not familiar, the National Center on Intensive Intervention is a great website that if you're not familiar with, this is probably the top thing I would tell you to learn from my presentation is to go to this website. There are a lot of great resources there, including full college level courses on literacy and behavior. So a great website. But the idea here is what we do with teachers is we work with them to collect some data on their students, identify an evidence-based reading intervention. We give them that intervention, teach them how to use it, and then work with them to design a progress monitoring system. Typically, that is a curriculum-based measurement or CDM, and set goals for students. If they go multiple weeks without getting closer to their goal, we collect some additional diagnostic data and then work with them to adapt that intervention. It's a very iterative process that, over time, if things aren't working, they change what they're doing so it eventually works. And teachers have really found this kind of model and the process of collecting data to be very useful for thinking about how they're going to intensify instruction if a student's not being responsive. And you can go to the next slide. And so this is just an example graph that you can see we have, some goals for the student named Millie up there, and you can see the student, she was not meeting her goal, and so there were instructional adaptations implemented as the student was not being responsive. And so we're working with teachers. One of the things I think we're finding really interesting in this project is that a lot of the work from the National Center on Intensive Intervention has been very focused on kids with learning disabilities. And so we're doing a lot of exploration around what is the timing for when you make adaptations for kids with intellectual disabilities who may not be responding as quickly as a student with the LD might, and then what other data besides CBM might we need to supplement. And so we're kind of, we're learning a lot from the teachers on that one. And you can go to the next slide. So this is Diane Browder's model of literacy instruction. I think the probably most important thing about this slide is to realize that those big 5 components of reading, like phonemic awareness, phonics, etc., are a good chunk of what we're doing. We're working really hard to bring the science of reading to these classrooms. But you can see that in this picture, there are a lot of other things going on. And the top part is increasing students' access to literature. And so even if a student is not able to read the text, we are providing strategies for using adapted books, technology, peers, so that they're able to access that gen ed knowledge, even if their reading skills are below their grade level. And so I think this model is really helpful to help teachers understand that literacy is broader than just the basic 5 components of teaching reading. And you can go to the next slide. And this is just an example of the TORCH modules. So we have the professional development, their video recordings and PowerPoints and all the typical things. The teachers interact with the module, and then we connect them with other teachers so they can kind of discuss what they're learning, what's working, what's not working, and they can problem solve with one another. And you can go to the next slide. And this is just an idea that, so we're again following this design thinking approach, which is the idea that we, again, just very iteratively give stuff to teachers and listen very closely when they say something is or is not working, and then we change what we're doing. And I think one of the biggest things we found last year, we were working with the gen ed teachers, and we gave them a lot of literacy strategies, but we realized that we kind of needed to back up a bit and improve just general instruction and classroom management. And that was feedback that we got from teachers that they felt they needed that support. And so we've kind of revised this year to do that. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So these are our short-term outcomes. So again, improving literacy outcomes, aligning instruction, aligning the IP with Andrew, and hoping to improve our teachers' knowledge and skill. And then we really want to end up with a model that teachers just feel is very feasible and desirable to do. I think one of the things we're working a lot on is helping try to understand what motivates teachers to implement certain practices and what will kind of help them sustain research-based practices in their classroom. And so that's one of our goals as well. And you go to the next slide. So longer term outcomes, again, we're hoping just the changes that we see are maintained. We're hoping within each classroom they implement with more teachers. And then we're also hoping that students with ID have more positive secondary and post-secondary experiences. And so we're going to be following our students over the course of the project to see how they transition into high school and perhaps beyond if we still have funding at that point. And then we're just hoping to really replicate this across multiple classrooms and campuses in our participating districts. And you go to the next slide. So our formative evaluation, we're doing measures of teachers' knowledge and skill through observations. We've developed multiple assessments that we're administering to the teachers. We have a battery of tests, both pre-post for our students and also ongoing curriculum-based measurements. And then in single case design, which is an experimental method that relies on visual analysis. We're also having the teachers graph their progress learning data to see if we can see those visual changes like I showed you in the graph. And then we're collecting and analyzing students' IEPs to evaluate if they've become more aligned with the industry standard over the course of the project. And you can go to the next slide. And then at the end, we're going to be using individual growth modeling, using hierarchical linear modeling on that progress monitoring data to see if we see changes related to the interventions the teachers are providing. We're going to synthesize all of that single case design data that we're collecting on our students. And then we're hoping at the end to end up with either a website or a textbook, but something that's very usable for teachers who were not in this project to replicate what we've been doing. And I think that might be the last slide. Is there one more? I think that's it. Okay, so yeah, so that's what we've been up to, and I look forward to your questions in just a minute.
Thank you very much, Chris, and I hope we do have time for a few questions at the end. I'm sure that there will be some. Our last presenter is Russell Swinburne Romine. Russell, I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. If not, you can correct me. Russell's from the University of Kansas Center for Research. He's going to be talking about the shared writing instructional model for students with intellectual disabilities. This model is a new approach to writing instruction designed to help students with intellectual disabilities meet challenging writing objectives aligned to grade level content standards and improve English language arts outcomes. The model, the acronym is SWIM, incorporates research-based learning map models of writing development, evidence-based practices for writing instruction, and aligned assessments into an easy-to-use dashboard that teachers use to plan, deliver, and evaluate writing instruction. Professional development and coaching will support teachers in site-specific implementation of SWIM. Expected outcomes include teachers' routine use of the model, leading to increased student achievement in writing and self-regulation strategies. So Russell, we would love to hear more about your project.
All right, thanks everybody. And thanks also to our project officer, Susan Weigert, for inviting us to talk to you today. My name is Russell Swinburne Romine. I'm the Associate Director of the Atlas Center at KU. And just as a little bit of background for you, that's also the center that houses the Dynamic Learning Maps Alternate Assessment System. So this project is actually an extension of some of the work that we did as part of the DLM system a couple of years ago, focused specifically on using learning maps as a way to develop a model to teach writing to students with intellectual disabilities in K through 6. So we go to the next slide, and I'll try to make sure I am concise today to preserve some time for questions. I'm going to tell you a little bit about kind of an overview of the project, show you a few examples of learning maps and talk about their uses, how we've approached sort of interleaving evidence-based practices into all aspects of the model that we're developing, including the assessments that teachers are giving to students as part of writing instruction. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the software dashboard that we're developing that is essentially the way that we're packaging up the different model components so that teachers can actually use it as an online available tool to help guide instruction for individual students in writing. And then if we've got time at the end, just a little bit about where we are in terms of project implementation. So if we go to the next slide, please. Our basic goals for this project are similar in kind of the structure that you've heard from Shawnee and from Chris. First one is to develop the SWIM intervention components and framework. That includes the learning maps that we use as kind of the formal learning models that describe the knowledge, skills, and understanding that students use when they are developing as writers. We are associating and leaning on a lot of the sort of evidence-based practices that have been published around writing instruction for both students in general education and students with intellectual disabilities to be able to sort of map those evidence-based practices right onto the learning maps so that we can develop a model that actually provides teachers with customized instructional resources that are suited for their individual students. Our second goal is implementing the SWIM system across multiple contexts. And then the third goal is dissemination in terms of products and resources that we develop as part of the project. Our partners are located in the state of Iowa. We're working with the Iowa Department of Education. We also have a pilot and design district located outside of Des Moines that we've been working with for the past couple of years, and we'll be moving into some additional districts within Iowa when we are able to resume implementation, hopefully next school year. Our purpose of the project is just to develop, implement, and evaluate this model that promotes progress of students with intellectual disabilities towards grade level expectations and the development of self-regulation skills in the context of writing. And one of the things that we're doing, particularly in concert with our partners in Iowa, is actually using their specially designed instruction framework to think about how we package and develop materials so that they are going to sort of work seamlessly within the context that you see has happened in the state of Iowa around sort of supporting early literacy development, particularly on the reading side for students with intellectual disabilities. Next slide, please. Like everyone else, we are dealing with a COVID revised timeline of project activities. Originally proposed as a 4-year project, we are now likely a 5-year project. In year 1, we spent a lot of time and resources on developing sort of the model and the resources that would go into it. In year 2, we were able to get out and conduct a pilot study in our design and pilot district, which ended, if I am remembering correctly, on March 9th of 2020, which may be the luckiest thing that happened to me this year. However, as a result of the COVID pandemic and some conversations both with our project officer and with our partners at the State Department of Education, we've basically taken a pause year this year, which is kind of a blessing and a curse because we'd obviously really love to be out in schools doing the next iteration of implementation. On the other hand, it does provide us with an opportunity to really think through some of the questions about how to fit the pieces together to support teachers in supporting students writing instruction over time. Let's go 2 slides ahead, please, Blythe. We're focused on basically developing a model that works within an instructional cycle in which teachers use research-based learning maps, which I'll show you an example of here in a second, to diagnose for instructional design. And these colored boxes actually line up with the Iowa Specially Designed Instruction Framework. By using those research-based resources, they are able to design for instructional delivery and develop instructional plans that are tailored both to their specific students' needs, but also provide them with some on-demand access to evidence-based practices that are targeted around the specific contents of instructions for students. After teachers work with students on doing writing instruction, they have access to some assessments where they can collect data with some customized data sheets based on their experience with students. Let's move ahead to the next one. The foundational sort of component of the project are the learning maps. We're designing a model for teachers to use large-scale research-based formal models of learning called learning maps to identify conceptually rich appropriate instructional targets for individual students. So if we go to the next slide, you can see an example of a very small section of learning map, which shows an interrelated set of knowledge, skills, and abilities, which are represented by these small circles in this diagram, and then they have arrows that connect them that show the multiple different ways that students can meet academic expectations over time. We focus the development of these maps on information gathering standards in K through 6, and that includes alternate content standards and the General Education Iowa Core standards, as well as some neighborhood learning maps that show the informative and explanatory writing standards, and then also standards related to opinion writing. We're focused on basically being able to sort of put together these formal knowledge terrains as students develop as writers so that we can meet the needs with appropriate instructional match for emergent writers, transitional writers that are beginning to sort of adopt conventional forms, and then finally conventional writers who are putting words together to express ideas and information. Let's go to the next slide. The way that we've been thinking about evidence-based practices in this project is really designing a model that uses an easy to follow research supported instructional sequence, which I'll show you in a second, is the basis for teaching writing. And once teachers are familiar with that instructional sequence for writing instruction, the model is designed to support their variation of sort of emphases and focus using the same sequence over to develop text with students, but to be able to vary the content and the focus of the actual instruction that goes with that sequence over time based on the contents of the learning maps that they've selected. If we go to the head of the next slide, the way that we've been thinking about integrating evidence-based practices into the model is at both sort of a macro level and a micro level. So when we think about sort of big evidence-based practices around writing instruction, we think about the SWIM instructional sequence that we've developed. We think about the entire neighborhoods of learning maps that are available for teachers to look at. And we think about sort of broad EBPs like self-regulation strategy development, in which students are able to sort of develop their understanding and their ability to engage in self-regulation activities as part of constructing text during writing process. We're also thinking about some micro applications where we're actually looking at some evidence-based practices that are kind of small in scope and might be focused to a very sort of constrained region of a particular learning map, but might be very useful, for example, in terms of helping students to develop their ideas around writing opinion texts. The idea is basically to allow the SWIM system itself as delivered through the online dashboard to give teachers access to just-in-time relevant actionable information based on who their student is and what their specific instructional targets are. Let's go ahead to the next slide. The SWIM sequence itself, which is our instructional routine, is a 5-step sequence that if you've spent time looking at sort of sequences for writing development overall, whether they're for students with intellectual disabilities or their general education peers, is going to look pretty familiar. So those 5 steps are just choosing a topic and a purpose for writing, communicating about that topic and a purpose, plan for writing about the topic and the purpose, write about the topic with a purpose, and then review for purpose and revise. And as part of the SWIM model, teachers are working individually or in small groups with students and actually engaging in cognitive modeling of these 5 steps. So that students are able to build competence and ability to do these things over time. Let's move ahead to the next slide. This is actually just an example which is available in the slide deck, which you'll be able to download, which shows you some of the sort of nitty-gritty specifics in terms of how different knowledge, skills, and understandings align to those 5 steps within the SWIM sequence. Let's move ahead, being cognizant of time, to the next. The last component that sort of is included as part of the instructional cycle are assessments that are available to students, which are sort of easy data collection sheets, which are available through our online dashboard, so that after teachers have made an instructional plan and gone through an instructional cycle with a student, they're able to collect some immediate information about both the process that they went through with the student and also the student's writing product. And we're hoping to be able to show some development of students' ability over time using those measures. If we go ahead to the next slide, the way that we're essentially doing that is by providing both professional development and coaching to individual participating teachers. We are focused on giving them the tools and the experience so that they can make instructional decisions about what students need to focus on and how to provide sort of appropriate access to that content for them. So we're developing, as part of the dashboard, this SWIM instructional pathway tool, which is always a balancing act between teachers' kind of desires for precise definitions and instructions on things versus the flexibility that we want to see in terms of judging what students are actually doing as part of the writing process. So we're encouraging a lot of formative assessment practices while they're engaged in the shared writing activities with students, and then also collecting some more mastery-oriented data after instruction from teacher judgment. And reflecting on student performance is a big part of sort of the coaching model that we've developed, in which teachers are working with an instructional coach to actually think about what they're seeing and think about how they make decisions about next steps for students. So how are we going to do this? We'll go ahead to the next slide. We're actually putting together an online technology tool that will actually handle sort of the information and be the nexus of where those coaching conversations happen with individual teachers. SWIM dashboard is essentially an online tool that will allow us to put together the learning maps, the associated evidence-based practices, instructional planning tools and assessments in a single interface, so that teachers are able to actually look at sort of going through the process over time with individual students and taking some data in terms of what that student's progress looks like. The next couple of slides I won't spend much time on because they're basically just examples of sort of what an online interface can look like. We are currently in the process of going through another iteration of technology development. One of the things that we are going to be doing during our sort of pause of implementation year is actually doing some focus group and utilization studies as we sort of put together the tool with some of our participating teachers from the pilot district who went through the process with us last spring. And last, I'll just kind of wind up with where we are in terms of implementation. Having concluded a pilot study, we're actually moving forward into recruiting additional districts with the help of the State Department of Education to ensure kind of a balance of contexts that we're able to implement the model in. We're also finalizing kind of our suite of professional development resources for next year so that teachers have access to very short, quick modules that are aligned to each element of the swim instructional cycle that we can deliver virtually through Moodle, linked through from our dashboard. And then on the next slide, the last sort of component to kind of bring it all together is we have an instructional coach that basically will be working with individual students or individual teachers in terms of helping them get into the swim system, make decisions along the way, reflect on their practice, and develop sort of communities of practice at all sites. We'll be doing some small group coaching within those kind of PLC communities. There's also some one-on-one coaching available to participants, and then coaching office hours where participants have access to research staff to be able to make decisions about what they're doing with their students. So on the next slide, just to wrap up, our basic sort of COVID gap year activities are putting some more resources into refining products as we've had to take this sort of pause. At the end of our next 2 cycles of iteration, we're hoping to have 30 teachers having participated with about 90 students across 3 to 4 districts across the state, representing a mix of rural, urban, and suburban contexts, as well as some different contexts in terms of socioeconomics and other factors related to diversity within the state too. That does it for me. I see I've only left 4 minutes left. I will yield back the balance of my time for questions and discussion, but thank you all for being with us today.
And thank you, Russell. We are not seeing any questions that are in the chat at this moment. Want to thank the 3 of you, Russell, Chris, and Shawnee, for your presentations. That's fascinating material. It looks like most of our audience members have hung on through the call because this is such great information to share. So since there aren't questions, I'm just hesitating a minute to see if anything's coming up, but I don't see anything. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Again, thank our presenters, as well as all of you and the audience who have listened this afternoon. Our next TA call will be a month from today. That will be December 17th, Thursday at 4 o'clock, and we'll be sending out more information about that presentation as we get closer to that time. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.